in the Grimes case, we have a defendant who very much seems like a do-gooder. That, yeah, it's hard to dislike someone who's looking out for dogs. I mean, it's almost in our DNA that we're supposed to be good to dogs. And in this case, the defendant was involved in dog rescue type of work, and the someone who lived near her had a dog that was chained up in the backyard and not doing so well. So the defendant took the dog, tried to knock on the door to the house and found no one at home, and so took the dog to a veterinarian, and then refused to return the dog because she wasn't convinced they wouldn't leave the dog in the same conditions that led to the dog's ill health. Just completely refused to return the dog, and that she was given an opportunity to do so. The court in this case says a couple things. First of all, that the justification defense does not apply to dogs. That's actually kind of hard to swallow, probably for a lot of you as well. That why, if we could prevent, if the justification defense could be used to prevent certain types of property harm, or why shouldn't it be allowed to prevent certain types of property harm? Why would we not want the greater evil of the death of a dog to occur if some lesser evil could prevent this, the trespass, the temporary taking of the dog, for instance? So that part of the opinion, I think, is somewhat problematic. But the other part of this opinion, I think, is on very solid ground, that something feels wrong about her not returning the dog. If the dog is about to immediately die, or is in very serious medical, or in a very serious place, medically speaking, and so she takes the dog to the vet and then returns the dog to the owners, I would absolutely think the court would stretch to try to find a justification defense. In fact, it kind of seems like there's one there. But in not returning the dog to the owner, that kind of starts to feel like something different. And the court here describes in the legal terms what that difference is. That the justification defense is only available if you are faced with a situation where there are no other alternatives to prevent this greater harm that you've identified. So if the death of the dog, for instance, was the greater harm, and the trespass and temporary taking of the dog were necessary to keep the dog from dying that day, that would fit within the heartland of the justification defense. You can't find anyone home, he will die before someone returns. Justification, that would seem to fit that entirely, even though the court says there's no justification for dogs. I can't imagine that would stand up in a case that really involved the need to protect a dog immediately. But the court then says in order for this defense to work, the action has to be necessary, and there has to be no other lawful means to achieve this goal. So is it certainly possible, debatable, that if she had returned the dog, she could have convinced the dog owners to become better dog people, or she could have even filed a complaint against them for mistreatment of animals before the dog died or suffered too much injury, while the court was waiting to rule on this question. So there were other means at the defendant's disposal. Had she returned the dog, there were other means that she could have prevented harm to the animal. So that part of the opinion seems absolutely on solid ground, that there basically has to be no other way to achieve this, and it has to be clear and obvious in order for the justification defense to work. And the reason for that is fairly obvious. We don't want people second guessing the law and legal processes unless it's just obvious that there's no other way to prevent a worse harm. And that was true in the Monera case, where the defendant had to drive to get the medicine for her child. That was, that one was really quite obvious. Here, there are other ways to protect the dog. Maybe not that day when she takes it to the vet, but definitely later. So we'll get to one more case on justification, and you'll see it's a fairly difficult standard to meet, but there are times when it is in fact met.